How's it going, everybody? DJ K-Dub, Omaha, Wired Axcess podcast with the All Axcess Granted.
I didn't want that to be the standard. I didn't want someone else in the room to set the standard. I always wanted to do that.
The journey to get there, I think, is something, that is amazing.
Let's get this podcast started!
And just when things can totally go wrong, I thought I had the right thing saved and locked in. Nope. We'll have to pull that up later. Anyways, welcome to Wired Axcess podcast. I'm your host, DJ K-Dub Omaha, and today we have former Husker Monte, Christo. Monte, welcome to the show. How is life treating you?
Oh, it's good, man. I appreciate you having me on. So, always love sitting back and talking a little Husker football and whatever else you guys got on tap for us tonight.
It's the best part is when you get to be, a fan, a player, a parent, and you have these complete circle times. Of course, for those that know, I ended up getting to know some of the former Huskers thanks to the Junior Skyhawks. My son was a part of it back in the day. That's where I first met Monte, kind of as a coaching style. Of course, we were in different grades. Our boys are different ages. But just as a culture, I think of how that culture was run, and I think of, what you guys have been able to accomplish just as the Huskers, prior to 2000, all of the great things between the wins, the grit, the stuff that, nowadays, who knows if any of those teams would still have been together through all of it. That's always a big wonder, right? Like, if this was the same age, could those people stay in and would they still be in, but you look back at yourself and you think back, you're a homegrown Husker. You went to and lived in Kearney. What was that like for you growing up just in the state and understanding what Husker football was for yourself?
Oh, it was amazing. I grew up like most kids, loving the Huskers, and I grew up in a great time too. I can remember back in the day listening to the games on the radio. Not every game was on TV, but I would listen to every single game on the radio, be out in the backyard playing with my buddies, Turner Gill, Mike Rozier, and then I got the opportunity to come and play there and have one of my idols, Turner Gill, be my position coach. So it was such a surreal experience. I was fortunate enough. My dad was a coach, so I was around the game a lot as a kid. He coached at Kearney High. Was one of my coaches in high school. So was always got put in a great position, and things worked out well. And I'll never forget the day Coach Osborne drove his little minivan out to Kearney and made a visit to my house and pulled up. And I think everybody in the street knew he was coming. And he walked inside and sat down and gave me the opportunity to walk on, and just something I couldn't pass up. And it was an amazing 5 years for me.
Well, and you mentioned a great part there, walk on, a status that now is no longer, a status that did kind of, I wouldn't say it was just more in the bad light, like they didn't want him for a couple years. So being a former walk on, you got to look at that aspect where they're not making the best of the walk ons sometimes. There was those couple years here after the 2000s, where walk-ons just didn't feel like they were important on the team. And then they just flat out get rid of them, and then they cut the roster down. And you think of all these adjustments from back when you were young and you were going through the recruiting process. How much of that when you're going through your own recruiting process? Yes, I get it. It was 20 years, 30 years ago, sorry. But when you think of that, just the opportunity, now it's, what you have to talk to your sons is a little different. It's not as, here is the team that we have grown up with. Here's what we have. There's options, there's opportunity, there's people throwing money. There's so much more things that are thrown into a prospect that, as a father, that was a walk on, how do you look at the situation now compared to when you were growing up on that?
Yeah, it's changed so much, obviously, just especially in the last 5 years. But part of me really wishes that was still an option for kids in this state. You look back over the years, there's been so many guys that were granted that opportunity and that ended up playing huge roles at Nebraska. I played a little bit my senior year and got one start, but contributed quite a bit my senior year. My roommate, Joe Makovica, was a big time player. And there's so many stories about guys like that today wouldn't get that opportunity. And that's the part that I think is hard. Um, but it has opened up some other opportunities for kids. They're getting more opportunities to go to the Dakota schools, some of the other good Division II schools in town, so or in the state. So not ideal in terms of just the opportunities for the kids that are growing up in the state, because there's just only probably 3 or 4 kids that are going to get that chance to come to Nebraska a year now.
Well, but I mean, also, if you think about it, I mean, think of when you were looking to love and want to play for that team. Is that passion as deep as it was once before for young kids? I mean, there's so much seeing all these other teams and all this hype stuff for everybody else, and then you don't see the wins on the win column for Nebraska. Is that drive still the same? I mean, when you talk to your own kids, of course, going through, you have multi-sport athlete kids, right? That they could play football, they could play baseball, they have opportunities, but are they looking at Nebraska, or, and you don't even have to say for your own kids, but are you thinking the kids have that same grit to go, that's where I want to be?
Yeah,
Because
it's
that
hard.
is where I live.
Yeah, I think so many kids that are in the high school age, even kids that were my oldest son age, Drew, who's now 20, 21, 22, like they didn't really get the opportunity to watch Nebraska have success. And that's the hardest part. Sometimes you have to tell these kids and show them old videotapes and clips of when we actually were playing the BCS and the national championship games. So if you don't grow up seeing it, it doesn't surprise me that there's not as much love for that in this generation. And that part's hard to see. My kids have grown up with it. They've lived it. So they've been at the stadium. They've come back to practices when I've gone back with me. But I think you're right. The majority of high school kids and college age kids right now, a lot of them are just sort of non-believers, and they kind of just grew up with a Nebraska football program that they haven't seen the success for themselves.
Yeah, and you think of like even a recruiting process for yourself. Obviously you got the opportunity to walk on, but what do you remember about just that process? Of course, yes, I know things have changed. People can throw up a highlight quicker, but there was a process, there was a way to go about things, and it was where patience had to rule you more than people think it does now. And I noticed after I talked to some of these 27s and some even the 26s today, where they were just like, you need to have patience. And I think this day and age kind of takes away from patience, because everybody has the in now, right? I can reach out to you, I could call you right now anytime that I want. That wasn't the way it was, and you had to play that patient game.
Yeah, I think we just kind of live in a world that's very sped up. The information is available anytime, any place for any person. Um, and so the game has just changed so much. In fact, I was just telling my boys the other day about when I was getting recruited, and Dan Young, who was an offensive line coach, he coached with Milt Tinniper, and he was the guy in charge of recruiting the state of Nebraska, specifically the high school kids and the walk-on kids. And so Coach Young would call on usually Saturday or Sunday night after the game on Friday, and it would be a phone call to the house. Nobody had cell phones, so you had to sit there and wait. You kind of knew what time he was going to call, and it was usually about a 3-minute talk. But yeah, the game just the recruiting game just happened so much slower. There wasn't this constant need for wanting all the information right here, right now. So you had to trust in it a little bit. I think relationships were probably a little bit more important, trusting the coaches that were recruiting you and talking to you. So it's changed a lot just in terms of the visit schedule. Kids coming to junior days, kids going to spring games, all the kids that they have on every single game day
Well,
visit.
I mean,
So
they got
it's
those Friday night light camps. I mean, this year they added the 7-on-7. So it was cool to see some of the 2027s get together and show that they could compete without, like, what I like is they were going up against some teams that had years of like a couple years together. And these kids are just coming out throwing the whip. And
yeah.
and the fast game of the 7-on-7, you can still win doing that. You don't have to have these multiple years together. So then it is one of those where, does it show them what they could be and then they want to come back, and as you could see some of them have, or does it make you think that you could go anywhere and do what you want to do, because everybody has these camps, everybody has these 7-on-7. Is there too much of everybody, or or do you feel like it's just right because there is so many athletes that are looking to play this game, and we all know the percentages. 2 to 3% are the only ones that get to go on and move on from level to level. It isn't like it's this wide percentage of athletes get the opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I understand why they do it. In terms of the numbers of camps and the different styles of camps. Anytime a coach can get a kid on campus, that gives them another opportunity to get ahead of another school that might be recruiting them. My personal experience in the recruiting aspect as a father has would kind of make me give people advice to try to back up a little bit, to try to slow down a little bit. I remember when my son was going through the recruiting process, and that was for baseball, which is at a far different level down than football. It can get exhausting, and it could be a lot for a kid. I'm sure thinking about everything and all the phone calls and trying to please people, and it can be expensive, and it can be exhausting for parents trying to get to so many different places. So when I've had parents ask me, give me advice on, how'd you guys do it, or what'd you think about it? I just try to tell them, you don't have to go everywhere. Don't try to please everyone. Just take your time with it and invest in relationships. And that's really the biggest piece of advice I would give parents. Don't try to do everything. Don't try to go everywhere, because at the end of the day, you're only going to have about four official visits, 5 official visits, and those are the ones that should count.
Well, and if you think about it, of course, everybody's like, well, I mean, you're a former Husker, so it's got to be easier. What do you think is easier for being a part of the program already in your history in your life, compared to those parents who have no knowledge at all? Have you had those type of parents that are trying to maybe reach out a little bit more than the ones that have the backing, like a former Husker as a father or stuff like that? Because I think in this day and age, the information you're sharing is so important for those parents who have no resources. And that's, of course, every time I talk to these athletes and I try to share, I don't interview them until they get their commitment, because that part of the process and getting to there is so important for families and athletes to understand. Like, yes, there is a lot of people who do in podcasts and do this style, and they might interview you before that decision, but just know, like, the ones that respect that know that this process is not easy.
Yeah, it's not easy. And for me, even though I played, like we talked about, it was a different time, a different era, a different way to recruit. So when I went through it with Drew, I think I learned a lot. And then now, and I've got another son who's a junior in high school. He's starting to get some interest in a couple different sports. So I feel like I've learned a lot just by going through it once, not necessarily because I was a former Husker football player. I just think going through the process one time is kind of given me some important details that I can share with people. And so that's kind of what I try to give them. Enjoy the process. Don't let it overcome you. Don't let it stress you out. This is going to be an opportunity for you and your family and your child. Don't make it a negative, because sometimes it can speed you up a little bit and make you a little bit stressed out, and it shouldn't be like that.
Well, and of course, with your playing days, we'll go ahead and I got that clip up. I always like to throw a little clip for everybody, but here's good old Monte back in the day.
Alexander touchdown, fourth quarter. Monte Christo, a 16-yard touchdown run, diving into the end zone. The 20th victory over the Cyclones for Nebraska in the past 21 years.
Man, when those we listened all the time on ESPN, and they had all these wonderful stats of 20 years this, 38 years this, and this.
Mm.
And then once those records start to crash, it was a sad, sad time. I'm just being
Yeah,
honest. Like,
now it's like the other way. We're setting records for not being at places. Although we've been to 2 bowl games now, at least we kind
that's
of got
right.
that one out of the way.
But if it's one of those things also where you feel like it feels like once they started the downward spiral of all these records they kept saying we had, it felt like every time that they mentioned it on any game that you're watching, that record was over. So if they
Yeah,
said no interceptions for 27 touchdown passes, boom, we throw back to back. I just never understand how those commentators get it right.
the
But
announcer curse.
you think back to when you played and you think of just what it took to be a Husker back then, what was probably some of the things that most athletes wouldn't have been able to do because they just don't get that atmosphere and understanding of what you guys did to be those champions in those years?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing is just the sense of being a part of something greater than yourself. The team just mattered, I feel like, more. And clearly the transfer portal has been probably the biggest part of that. Um, but we maybe had one or two guys transfer out in the 4 or 5 years that I was there. A, because there was a penalty if you did it. And B, we were very good and people wanted to be around and people wanted to be on the team. Um, but I just think kids today, and I don't blame them because there's dollar bills being thrown around. There's just less of a sense of team, which makes it hard when you're turning your roster over, 40, 50% every year. It'd be hard to be a teammate. It'd be hard to develop relationships. I think it'd be super hard for coaches to have to deal with that year in and year out. So that's probably the biggest thing. I think, when we played, obviously we were having a lot of success at the time, and everybody just wanted to be a part of that. And so, we all kind of just hung in there together. There were guys like me who played scout team for 3 years and got their butts beat in every day. But guess what? I wanted to come back and I wanted to be a part of the team. So that's probably the biggest difference, I think, and not just at Nebraska, but probably on every college roster and every college team.
As a quarterback, how were you able to know where your position was back then, like you said, to be able to come in on scout team? And I think sometimes people don't accept their role, and if they do, good things come from it. You were still able to get your education, you were able to help in your senior year. Like, those are the things that will stick with you because you stuck it out more than it would have had you just said, "Oh, I'm out." It got
Yeah.
hard, I'm out. It got hard, I'm out. And now that can't ever be your excuse because you've went through some of the hardest things that most people will give up in a heartbeat.
Right. I mean, and I was no, I kind of knew what I was getting into. I was an 18-year-old walk-on coming in with the room with Tommy Frazier and Burke Behringer. Like I didn't think I was going to start right away. But I believed in myself, and I believed that if I put in the work and if things went my way, that I'd get an opportunity. And it really, my freshman year, Tommy Frazier got hurt, Brooke Behringer got hurt, Matt Sherman was, dinged up, and guess what? I was 18 years old and I was traveling to every single game, and so things happen, and so I traveled with the team as a true freshman, and then the next 3 years I spent in the training room because I got hurt about every single year. But then my senior year, things kind of went my way again, and we had two young quarterbacks, and Bobby Newcomb and Eric Crouch, we all played. And so it worked out for me. And I'm just glad that I did stick it out because there were multiple times where I came home beat up and, just off of a surgery. And it would have been easy to just be like, you know what, I'm just going to go to school. This is too hard. But, I stuck it out. I committed to doing it, and it paid off for me in the end.
When you talk about those injuries and you think back to those days, of course, like those are the days of the darkness, right? Like, of where anything could happen. You said it yourself, where one day you could just say, all right, I'm done, I'm not going to go back. What was some of the things, and who helped you get out of that darkness for yourself? Because everybody has to find someone, because it you're no longer the big subject of the team. And I'm not saying like you're the number one subject, but once you're not available, that makes them not want you to be available. The availability isn't there. They kind of let you do your own thing. He's going to rehab. He's going to do his own thing. It's not like, always you have someone checking in on you. Who is your kind of go-to to help you get through some of those
Yeah. So I had probably had a couple different people that I leaned on. Like I said, my dad was a college athlete. He played defensive tackle back in the day when it was Kearney State College, and he was my high school coach. So we would have some good talks. My girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, she's probably the person I poured out into more than anybody. And then my roommates, I lived with three other guys that were walk-ons, and we were all kind of living the same life. And it's hard when you come from being the man at your high school to a program like Nebraska where you're just another guy and sometimes you're fourth or fifth on the depth chart, and then you get hurt, right? I mean, because you're really in the background now because you're not even in the two deep, and now you're not even practicing. So like you said, there's some tough days, especially as a young man. First time you've gone through something like that. So I had a great support system. My dad, my current wife, Jill, and then my roommates at the time. So
Of course, you look at the coaching change right before your senior season, and you have this going on. How good and easy was that for you compared to what some people have to deal with when it is a coach that you don't know? Or what was kind of your experience going from Tom Osborne to letting Frank take the reins for you?
yeah, that was an interesting time, because Coach Osborne had been there forever. We'd had so much success. And everybody was all in on Coach Solich being the next head coach. And it just happened to be my senior year and the 1 year that I actually played. And so I always had a great relationship with Coach Solich because that was the year that I played the most. He gave me the opportunity to get into games, meaningful games, to start a game. Um, so I'll always have a special relationship with him. We went 9-4 that year, and people were about ready to lose their minds. We'd love to have 9 wins right now. So it just sort of gives you some perspective on things. But it was definitely a different time. Coach Solich had been up in the press box for 20 years, helping Coach Osborne see the defenses and call the plays. And all of a sudden, he's the guy on the sideline going through that process for the first time. So there were some adjustments, I think, for him and for all of us. But again, looking back on it, it was a great year for me, and I still have a good relationship with him.
And of course, being a player, all of a sudden you got to decide on real life. What was that decision like for you to go? Okay, I know football's over. It's time to move on. What was that like for you, and who'd you go to talk about that to decide what your next step was after football?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of a realist. I knew that I wasn't a guy that was going to be playing after college. Although I did play 1 year of indoor professional league while I was waiting for for
Where'd you
med
play
school to
that at?
start. It was the first year that Lincoln had a team. They were called the Lincoln Lightning, and we played at Persian
Okay.
Auditorium, and it was a ball. I tell you what, we had a
Well,
blast.
I mean, I do. I mean, as you can see, the StreamYard is brought to you by our Omaha Beef, which people still forget. I
Yeah,
mean, they've been to the championship the past 5 years. They've won 3 of them, 2 with Tommy Armstrong. I mean, that alone was fun.
yeah.
I was part of one of them. So I mean, they have a great product out there. So to hear that you got to play some indoor league, it's what I tell people. When you want football in March, this is where you come watch football in March because it's fast paced, it's
It was
always
fun.
action, and they're a part of the crowd. Like
Yeah.
you know how it is in college. You guys get to say hi, you get to come up to the side, but you don't get to jump up into the fans. You don't get to
No.
give high fives. You get a flag on that. Here you
Yeah,
got
we
to throw
didn't.
a football to
I don't
someone.
think we really know what we were getting into because it was the first time Lincoln had ever had a team, and so it was myself. There were a few former Huskers on that team. Damon Benning played, Dwayne Harris. So there were some really good. And we're traveling on
Okay.
buses, yeah, to Green Bay and Peoria and Topeka, and it was just a different deal, right? We're used to chartered planes down to the bowl games, and all of a sudden we're on bus trips. So and some of these dudes thought this was like their path to get to the league. And I was just like, I'm trying to just get a couple $100 here so I can go to med school in a couple months. But it was a really, really fun, interesting couple months. But back to your question. So I knew that I wasn't going to be playing after college. And I spent so much time in the training room when I was getting hurt that I got to know our team physicians pretty well. And I always liked science and math, and I knew I was good at that stuff. So at some point, the light bulb clicked that, well, maybe I can do what these guys are doing and help people and be in the medical field. So um, I applied to medical school and got in, and the rest is kind of history. Been in Omaha ever since as an anesthesiologist.
I have to say, if there's one thing that the 90 Huskers have proven, you can go out and be a doctor in some way, some shape, some form. I mean,
There's a
you got
lot of them.
there is a lot of them. So I want to say thank you for all those memories as players and the memories post players is if you need someone, we got you on lockdown out there as anesthesiologist. Is
You
that
bet.
right? What made you
Yeah.
decide
Yeah.
that type and that's what you wanted to go to?
Yeah. So honestly, when you get into medical school, you sort of the first 2 years you're just grinding, you're learning, you're in the classroom. It's more books and didactics, and then as you get into your third and fourth year, you get the opportunity to delve into the different specialties. And so, like I said, the only physicians I really knew were the sports med doctors, the guys that fixed my knee and fixed my thumb and fixed my shoulder, and I really liked them. So I always thought that that's what I would do, is get into, orthopedic surgery and do sports medicine. As I got into the rotations, I did find out that I loved being in the operating room. It was just a different vibe than being in the clinic every day and wearing a white coat and a
It's gotta
suit and
feel
tie.
more like the football, right? Like,
Yeah, so
like, it's like game time, let's
yeah,
go.
there's a lot of stuff going on. And then once I saw, the interactions between the anesthesiologists and the surgeons, um, it was a better fit for me to be on the anesthesia side because, things move quickly. There's lots of different things going on. I love physiology. So I don't know. I did a rotation in it. I had a classmate that was a year ahead of me that kind of told me that I would probably like it because we're like-minded buddies. So I got into it and I loved it, and the rest is history.
There you are. So, of course, then you start your family and you start having the boys, and you're getting them, and you're starting to be able to do the father thing. And when's your first thought of getting your kids into sports and the things that you love? Because of course you know the ups and downs of it, right? You know that one, okay, I could get you into these things, but I also got to make sure you have the books and all that, because you saw how important you having your college and get the rest of your degree now means to your family.
Yeah, so I mean, it happened quick for us. I was a fourth year medical student, and we found out we were having twins, and I didn't know where I was going to be for residency. We were living in a one-bedroom apartment, so life hit us pretty quick and pretty hard. So the first 4 years are a little bit of a blur for me because I was in my residency, and God bless my wife, she was at home with the kids. So um, but we made it through. That was kind of a challenging time just because there was a lot going on and I wasn't home a lot. But yeah, once I started in my practice, I wanted to be as present as my dad was for me. He was always there for me, helping coach in sports, and I didn't want my job as a physician or an anesthesiologist to take away from that experience of my kids. So I made it a point to be involved and to make sure that I was at least helping coach if they needed some coaching on their youth sports. But man, you probably know this. Youth sports it's wild. Like the amount of opportunities and travel and money, like it was not like that when I grew up. So I
No.
learned a lot as a dad, figuring out, okay, what is going on? We're playing 50, how many games? 50
Ask
games? Like,
Ericer, he has 7 kids, and he told me
yeah,
one day, he said they got, like, 39 coaches they report to between
yeah.
all the
It's
sports.
you gotta have
39.
you gotta have a spreadsheet, and you gotta have a budget. You gotta have everything if you want
Oh,
to be a parent and have multiple kids in youth sports. So that's another thing I learned, like along the lines of recruiting. As I got into our second wave of kids doing youth sports, like I kind of pumped the brakes on a lot of it. It's not as important you think sometimes the first time you're going through. Like it's all going to be good. Just let your kids have fun. Make sure they're having opportunities, and just give them the opportunity to do something that they want to do in high school if it's what they want to do. I didn't want to be one of those parents that forced something on my kids too.
yeah, how did they, how did their sports go? Where, and obviously, football's yours. They played football, but doesn't mean that they were 100% for football. When did, like, with Drew, when did that start coming for him where it was like, I'm gonna choose baseball, dad. I'm gonna go that. And how did that conversation go as a dad? Because these are just some things that I always like people to understand is, like, just because you did it and then you've already said it before doesn't mean they have to do it, but it's the way that you go about it, right? Like,
Right.
and of course, we all can ask for mulligans. Don't get me wrong,
Hmm.
but you gotta feed into what they love, and it just goes easier.
Yeah, and I think that's the key right there. Drew loved football. He probably loved football more than he did baseball. But to be honest with you, he was just so advanced at baseball at an early age. As a sophomore and junior, he was getting recruitment and teams from the draft were talking to him. So I think he was smart enough to realize that he had a skill set that most people don't. And he could have played football in college. In fact, I remember Scott Frost on his baseball visit pulled him aside and said, "Dude, if you want to walk on and do both, you can." But he also knew how hard that was going to be.
Yeah.
Um, so I think the important thing is, you find something that you love, find something that you can see yourself doing for 5 years because it's a commitment. College sports are real. Like it's work, and you better be into it. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. So
Now, when you
uh,
look at the baseball part for Drew, and you think of that road. It's not a road that you've traveled before, but of course you have some former athletes that and probably have worked with that have. Where did you get some of your help on some of that avenue of the grind of a baseball? Because I think people forget, not everybody just gets to be a first round draft pick and you get to play right away. Some of
Yeah,
those first round draft picks have a long journey of
it's
AAA, or if you choose
yeah.
college, you gotta find your place in college so then you could stand out for those pros.
Yeah, and I think baseball is kind of unique because there are opportunities where you can sign with a pro team right out of high school. And that there were conversations with him about that. But I think for Drew it was a pretty easy thing. He's a smart kid. He wanted to get a degree and get his education. So um, and I didn't know a lot of people in the baseball community. I was more dialed into the football people. So interesting, the first person who really started to educate me and also recruit Drew was the baseball coach at Nebraska at that time, who was a former teammate of mine, Darren Erstad. So I can remember Darren Erstad calling Drew and telling him, he was like a just finished his freshman year, and he's like, "Well, I wasn't really expecting to talk to you this early, but I hear all these other schools are, so I better tell you, we want you to be a Husker. We want you to be a Husker." And he goes, "I hate how sped up it is, but this is the game we're living in." So I had some really good talks with Darren back in the day, and he kind of, would tell me things about the recruiting process and how crazy it's going to get. So he was a great person to lean on, and he kind of gave me some good advice just to kind of how to attack it.
Well, and you think of that process for yourself, and you think of the opportunity for your son. What what makes you not have him? Does he do outside visits, or because he knows and he loves and he gets involved with Nebraska, does he just stay? Did he actually go, and how were those visits for you guys as a father? If you went to other colleges, and I say this because I heard, I've of course known Damon for a long time, just like yourself, and I talked to him about his son's visits, and like it's not easy being a former Husker to probably go into some of these other universities with that state of mind of going, okay, it's for my son, it's not for me. I
Yeah.
can't You can't have those feelings.
Yeah, and those coaches know it too. Like I'm telling you, the coaches at Stanford and the coaches at Arkansas and the coaches at Kentucky. I'm trying to think of the places we went on official visits. They all knew that I played Husker football. They all knew it was going to be really hard for them to probably pry him out of Lincoln with the roots that we had there. But I wanted Drew to at least see some of those things, get exposed to some other places. So yeah, he went on 5 visits and he had lots of opportunities to go to a lot of different places. But he kind of just grew up a Husker, and he wanted to be a part of Husker baseball. So I'll never forget when we were coming back from our trip to Stanford. I'm looking at my wife and I'm thinking, how would anybody ever tell these guys no? Because the place is beautiful, the program's a top 5 program. But Drew sat there at breakfast and thanked the coaches and told them, I'm going to be a Husker. So
And that's got to be the part where you're like, okay, the right people have done the right things, and for these athletes, it's all about how they feel, where they feel it, right? And if he was able to state that in a whole different atmosphere, and the best part is you've done something right as far as having your son show that he is just that straightforward, as far as polite, straightforward, realizing his opportunities, but also not trying to burn a bridge either, right? And if he did, he could have, because these athletes have that opportunity, right? Just as much as of a college leading them on, athletes can do the same thing and play a money game, but when you taught them right, the things go the right way.
yeah, and I think that's super important. And I told him, like, these phone calls aren't going to be easy when you tell these coaches that, because they invest so much time in you, that they're developing relationships with you. So it's not going to be easy to tell people no, but you just got to be open and upfront and honest, and hopefully that they'll respect that. And I would say 90% of the coaches were. Some of them took it personally and were mad that he wasn't coming to their university. But like you said, I mean, especially in today's day and age, 2 years down the road, you might be in the transfer portal, and that if you don't have a good relationship with that coach, that you're not going there. So it's always just important to be respectful and treat people the right way.
So of course, now we'll get to the fan slash former player part, and I always like to ask, former Huskers, like, How have you been able to distinguish yourself to kind of split between the fandom, being a former player, and what is your split? I only say this because I have I talked to Jordan Westerkamp, and he says he's still a fan of it. It's not like he's just a former player; he's a fan of it. Where's your distinguish for Nebraska football?
Yeah, I would say I'm the same thing. There was a moment, probably 4 to 5, 6, 7 years, where when I was going to medical school and I was in my residency, I was just so busy that I kind of lost touch with it. But then once I got back into having a little more free time and having a career and having a family, I've been a huge fan, and we're season ticket holders. We get to as many games as we can. Obviously been to every single baseball game in the last 5 years with Drew playing there. So we're diehard Husker fans, and so we've seen it all. Um, and I'm hopeful that things are heading in the right direction. I think Coach Rule says a lot of the right things. I think he's a good head coach. It's just time to see and how well he can recruit. But at this point, it's like let's put it on the table, man. Let's see some stuff. Let's get some results.
Yeah, I think I did the podcast earlier, and that's what Husker Bryant or Brian he does the show with Kenny Cheatham, good old Kenny Cheatham. They
Yeah,
do a podcast together. Yeah, I got to talk to him before as well. But that's just it. What we were talking about. We could talk about the money. We could talk about we got the funds, but if the funds ain't turning into the end result, none of that matters. And I think that's kind of where some people are. But when you think of the coaching that has kind of gone through these past few years, how as a former player and how as a fan have you been able to keep yourself, I guess, level-headed about it, understanding, the game as much as you do, but also maybe feeling a little bit like, man, I can't believe some of even our own would do the way they did it, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole of what they did. That's neither here nor there. But being a former player, you got to have some kind of thoughts or feelings on it, one way or the other.
yeah. I mean, I love college football, and I can remember all the way back to, I mean, Bo Pelini, and when we hired Mike Riley, like I knew who Mike Riley was. I knew the success that he had, and I just was emotionally so invested that, like, yes, he's going to work here. And of course, when Scott Frost came, it's like, yes, he's going to work here. He's the most wanted coach by anybody in the country. He's got ties. I played with him. I know this is going to work. So it's that part. I'm always hopeful. But we've been burned a couple times, to be honest with you. And so the hardest part, I think, for guys like me that have played, is just the emotional investment, right? I mean, there's a time investment that you got to go to these games. There's a financial investment. You're going to pay money to go to these games, but like emotionally, like you just want it to happen so badly. And now I've kind of just tried to dial that back a little bit. Not that I don't care as much, but like I just, you got to have realistic expectations. And I don't know that we'll ever get back to winning 3 national championships in 5 years. I just want to get us to the point where we can win a conference championship and once out of every 5 years. So I think as a fan, whether or not you played or not, kind of dialing back the expectations with the way college football is right now, trying to be just a little less emotionally invested. That's what's worked best for me.
Well, of course, with everything in the college world as far as transfer portals, NIL, when you look at football or just in general college sports, how do you think that has changed the whole platform? As you stated earlier, and I'm 150% on that board of you can't really get emotionally involved with players because it doesn't mean that they're involved. I mean, when people look at Raiola leaving, I'm not mad at a kid deciding to go elsewhere. If you don't want to be here, I want you to be where you're happy and always wish good luck. But I also hope that one day you'll show the respect back to the fans that, gave you everything they had for those years that you were here, you know? And I think that's where people are
Yeah.
kind of upset
Yeah.
with this new transfer portal is you don't have to say a word.
No, you just got it. The frustrating thing for as a fan is, like I said, the roster turns over so much, and so you don't. I think it's harder to get to know your team. Like you want to be a Husker fan, and back in the day, you'd have 5 years to get to know these players, and now it's like, man, you got to really dive in if you want to know who the players that are even playing are, because it changes so often. But again, to your point, like I don't blame the players for doing it. I mean, they have a short window to have these opportunities where they can make some financial gains. So that part's never going to go away now. And so we kind of just have to accept it. Um, and then that's just the way it is. Realize it. I mean, because you can't get mad at it because it's not going anywhere. And so I don't know. I used to be a huge recruiting, guru. Like I would know every single kid that was on a visit. I would have all these expectations for these guys when they come in as freshmen. And now it's like if they don't play in a year, they're gone. So I've kind of dialed back a little bit of that emotional investment too. And I'll get to know the players that are on the roster. And when they do well, I'll get to know them better.
And of course, you had your coaching years, and I believe they're all done. Is that correct so far?
Yeah. Yeah. So I
When you,
coach both my boys. And now that Ian's in high school, it's sort of nice just to be able to sit back and be a parent and watch and have a few more hours a week to not have to be doing all the coaching, although I did love it.
I was gonna say, what is the difference for you that was the hardest from going from player, coach to dad, and then what was the easiest transition for you in that whole process?
Um, I don't know that any of it was easy. I think once I started to be able to coach, I just loved it because I'm kind of a nut for the X's and O's, and as a quarterback, that's just kind of how we were trained back in the day with Coach Osborne and Coach Gill, just looking at defensive fronts and secondaries and coverages and what would you do here. I probably like Damon when we coached together, like we probably overthought it a little bit for kids that were 9, 10, 11, 12 years
No,
old,
no,
but
not
I,
at
I
all.
enjoyed it. Oh man, I just enjoyed like sitting down and drawing plays up on the paper and being able to be on the field with my kids. The hardest part probably was just taking that step back once they're in high school. Like you've sort of done it throughout their youth career, and now you just got to be able to sit there and watch and not be critical of high school coaches because that is such a thankless job. I mean, the high school coaches spend so much time with those guys, and I think they deserve so much credit for all that they do. And so I just kind of had to remind myself that it's not my job to coach them anymore. It's my job just to support them and be there for them.
How is it being Monte Cristo, who used to coach some of the kids that your kids play with, and sitting amongst the parents in the crowd? I don't know about you, but I know for me it is real hard because of the expectations of some of these parents to these kids. It just gets
Yeah.
hard because you know what it takes to be on that field.
Yeah, 100%. In fact, and usually if you were to watch me watch a game, I wouldn't be sitting with most people. I'm kind of one of those guys that's pacing around. I like to be by myself just to kind of because I don't want to say something, that I'll regret, and I may know something that maybe an assistant coach doesn't know. But again, I want to be respectful of their job. But I'm kind of always one of those dads that I like to just watch the game from my perspective, and I'm not usually sitting with everybody else.
Well, of course, I got to see Ian a little bit on some one-on-ones at a satellite camp that Coach held and UNK held out here in Omaha, and of course, you were up in the stands, so we are just kind of. He's like, "Oh, look at Monte up there. I'm trying to get him to come down the field. He won't." I'm like, "Dude, he's just being a dad. He's just
Yeah.
relaxing to be a dad." But when you look at those satellite camps and stuff like that, how important is that for being seen around here?
I think it's important, and again, there's lots of different kids that are going to eventually end up at different levels, and so I think as a parent, like one of the most important things is, being finding the sweet spot for what you think the right level for your kid is, and not going everywhere, not spending every dollar you have on every single camp, and so I, I was. I was super happy that Coach Held and UNK did that satellite camp in Omaha because not everybody's going to be a 4-star, not everybody's going to be a 5-star, not everybody's going to get an offer from Nebraska, but there's so many good opportunities for kids at all levels, whether it's NAIA, D3, D2, and so I thought it was just a good thing for Ian to kind of at least see what's out there, at least to see what the competition's like, because sometimes you live in a little bubble here in Elkhorn North, and all you're seeing are Class B kids. So it's good to go see some kids from Iowa and some kids from Class A schools and kind of compete against them. So I thought that was a great idea by Coach Held and UNK to kind of come into Omaha, give them a chance to see some kids that they normally don't get a chance to see, but also give the kids an opportunity to compete against some other kids in different classes in different states.
Well, and of course, your son picked up an offer here, but when you look at schools like UNK and you're seeing some of, the coaches or players that you used to coach with around the league at different levels, and you see also some of their kids playing in, like, how surreal is it coming of how, like, I know that Nebraska is a school of where the regime of names can sometimes live on, but it hasn't been that way for a while where we've seen, the sons of former Huskers wanting to come, but you're seeing it now more. You're seeing a lot of the 90s kids or players, their kids are now starting to become the age to where they're playing. What does that mean for you to kind of see that kind of history? And obviously, you're seeing it even with your own son being able to play at your alma mater and just see that you know this Husker sometimes is more than just the wins and losses. It's more about that connection with everything else.
Yeah, that's been kind of a neat thing. There's been a handful of guys that I've played with whose kids have had the opportunity to get offered or be on the team at Nebraska, and a lot of them that are going to other schools too. So I think it's just it's kind of a cool opportunity if you do get that chance. Damon's kind of going through it right now. Tim Carpenter's another guy that I played with who's got a son on the team right now. Of course, my center Dominic Royal, his obviously has had some some recent history there. So there's definitely some kids that are going to come through the program and continue to come through the program. So it's kind of a nice little pride thing for the guys that have gone through it.
And then, of course, you're seeing coaches and coaches staffs that are around here that are a lot of similar faces. How does I mean, you mentioned it. Those D2, D3, and NAIA schools around here are just playing some good football and giving opportunities, whether it is, the UNK, the Wayne States, you got up there the South Dakota States, the South Dakota, they're just starting to show that you can stay. I mean, look at Iowa Western. What they just win their third
Yeah,
out of
third in a
four,
row.
third in a or second, two in a row, and three out of the last four. Like that just is nuts. Of thinking of the championship pedigree that is around us, but because Nebraska ain't winning that champion pedigree, everybody kind of thinks that it's not around the central of the United States.
Yeah, and again, as a parent, I think what I found out is you know, you want to find a place for your kid that they're going to be happy, that they're going to get an opportunity to play, that they're going to get an opportunity to get an education in what they want to do. Like sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the D1 stuff and all that stuff, but ultimately as a parent what you want is for your kid to go to a place where they can have some success, um, have coaches that are going to care for them, develop some great relationships with friends and teammates, because that's the stuff that I remember. I mean, the guys that I hang out with today are the guys that I played with. And I've got 3 national championship rings. We never bring those out or show those to people. It's the relationships that matter. Like that's the stuff that you want your kids to really have the opportunity to go through.
Now, of course, you were back in the, Elkhorn North, Elkhorn South, where that split happened with Drew, where the new school came out, and what was it like then? And then, of course, now you have Ian, who is at Elkhorn North, of course, because Drew is at Elkhorn South, right?
He was at Elkhorn High, so
Elkhorn High.
it's interesting. Yeah, so he kind of went through it when he was a sophomore and junior. Um, they were playing Class A football, and it was a grind because he was young and he was playing against guys like all bunch of D1 players. Burke had 2 guys, linebacker and a tight end. And then his senior year, they popped back down into B, and then they won a state championship. Now for Elkhorn North, it's like the complete opposite. His Ian's sophomore and junior year, they're B, and then next year, his senior year, they're going to pop up into Class A. So, yeah, we've got to kind of see it from both perspectives as Elkhorn continues to open new schools, and it has affected both my kids. But at the end of the day, football's football. We may take our lumps a little bit next year at Elkhorn North just because we're going to be playing some bigger schools. But we've got great coaches and great kids, and so they're gonna do just fine.
Of course, when you look at the future for Drew and Ian and your kids, and just thinking about, what is continuously progressing for them, what are some things that you guys have to really lock into when it does come to these colleges, and just hope that parents who are now in the process of making these decisions, besides obviously taking a moment to take a step back, what's the most important thing you guys think that you guys have together between you and your kids and there's those decisions with them?
I think a level of comfort, and that there's probably a lot of things that go into that. How far away is it? You know, how long has that coach been there? How comfortable are you with their system? So, um, I think that's probably the biggest thing. Is everybody on board? Is everybody comfortable with the decision that we're going to make? And you really only can get to that level once you've done your due diligence, once you've done your homework, once you've taken a few visits. And again, like if I get the opportunity to go through this with Ian, which we probably will, we're going to just make it simple and easy. I don't want him overthinking it. I don't want him thinking we've got to do too many things. Um, Find a list of the people that want you, make some lists of the things you love about those places, go take a visit and make a decision.
Well, Monty, I greatly appreciate your time. Of course, I greatly appreciate your insight and story, not just as a former player, not as a fan, but as a father as well. Because if this story can just get out to one parent or one athlete who's going through the process, this is a guy who comes from, like you said, 3 national championships. He doesn't have to talk it, wear it. It's all just there, and it's just knowledge of even going through injuries. He stuck it out, and he also can now take those things and he's shown into his kids who are now doing their own decisions. It's not easy. If it was, everybody would be those athletes. But again, there's only 3% players that get to the next level as being an athlete. So don't think you have to be this big superstar if your kid is not that person, and it's okay. Get them to as far as they want
Great
to go.
advice. Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
get them as far as they could
Well
go.
said.
So once again, I greatly appreciate your time, and as I always say, this series is found on Character Chronicles, characterchronicles.com. You could just go down on their podcast down below, or sometimes it's up at the top of the screen when you get there. And also, we can't do what we do if this wasn't powered by your Omaha Beef, who are starting their 2026 season, which they have been around for 27 seasons. 27 seasons. And it's some winning football. What more can you say? Until
Good
next
stuff.
time, Wired Axcess, all access granted. We'll see you.
The standard is the standard. We set the standard.